So today we have not just one wonderful guest, but we have two guests that are going to be with us. And they have a lot in common. They have both been co-teachers in public schools in a variety of grade levels. They've been respected university professors, experienced consultants for school districts around inclusive education, and also sought after speakers. So that might be where you have seen Paula and Julie before, but there are some things you might not know about them. So these are other things they have in common, but aren't exactly common knowledge. So both Julie and Paula enjoy long walks on the white sandy beach. They also both love Post-it notes, any size, but especially the shaped Post-it.
Yeah! Oh my gosh, yes!
And they love books that have talking animals as the main character.
Oh my God, my heart.
They both co-authored a book about co-teaching. And today you'll get a chance to win a copy of their book. All you have to do is type in the word co-teaching and you will get entered into our contest to win a copy of their book. So if you are new to the show, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, an advocate, and I am thrilled that you can be here with us. So if you are watching us live or on the replay, get ready to use those thumbs and press down on those heart emojis because we've got two fabulous guests with us today, Paula Kluth and Julie Causton. So welcome to you both.
Thank you. What an amazing introduction. That was shocking and gorgeous. And I cannot wait to further explore, especially that talking animal book, which is one of my significant fascinations. Love it.
I think we should do a read aloud of that instead. That's something we could consider.
Yes.
That's true. Well, I just think it's pretty amazing that we've got co-guests that are going to be talking about co-teaching. And I know one of the questions that I often get from parents and also educators is, what does good co-teaching look like? Because some people have experienced it where there's the classroom teacher and then there's the para kind of Velcro to the student. And yes, there's two people in the classroom, but that's not our idea of co-teaching. So I think it'd be a great start if both of you can talk about what good co-teaching really looks like in a classroom.
So Charmaine, I'm wondering, and Paula, if we want to do, one of us can do what to do and one of us can do what not to do. Paula, do you want to start with the what not to do or the what to do?
Well, let's start with what to do, I think. And Julie does such a good job of what not to do and has some hilarious examples. Do you want me to take what to do? Sure. So, in a healthy co-teaching relationship, you would see two teachers, two educators who are working together. They're planning together. They're purposefully working towards these shared educational goals, these shared aims. And in these constellations can come together with two teachers, a general ed and special ed teacher. We're increasingly seeing ELL teachers in our co-teaching teams, our therapists. So we want to make sure we don't leave out the fact that OTs and PTs and speech paths and vision itinerants, and I could go on and on, can be co-teaching for social workers. Counselors can be great co-teaching partners as well. Shared goals and aims, two or more educators working together, again, planning and working in the classroom together to support all learners. And that's something that Julie and I talk about a lot, is that, all teachers are there for all students. And so in a true co-teaching partnership, special ed folks, so folks that are there primarily, have the assignment around students with identified needs, are thinking about students with disabilities, certainly, but also have an understanding of the goals and the aims for students without identified needs. Even if you are not there full time, that we should be talking and thinking about how that class, we always talk about rising tides, all ships, so that our goal together should be how to create more enrichment, more support, how to make a more welcoming space for every single student. So we're not just there to make sure that 10% or 20% of the students have this better experience, that in order to really walk the walk and talk the talk, our marketing, so to speak, and our actions have to be about every single student in that co-taught classroom. And then, of course, for general education teachers as well, that we're thinking creatively about how we're serving students. And then we're also thinking about, and again, Julie and I write a lot about this, how this experience together is not only so super productive for our students, but in a really great co-teaching relationship, how do we grow together? And that now that I have this partner, how do we use this as a professional development opportunity?
Beautiful. I just want to add, I hope everybody heard Paula said that co-teaching is when there's more than one educator in the classroom. Many times people say, I don't know if we're truly co-teaching or not. When Paula and I are using the word co-teaching, we're meaning when there are two or more educators in the classroom together. So just to clarify that. And then I want to talk about what it isn't. So a lot of people hear co-teaching and they think, oh, it's general ed teacher, sage on the stage, standing and delivering, special ed teacher walking around, kneeling and supporting. And that's not what Paula and I are talking about. We're not talking about my kids and your kids. So imagine if Paula and I were co-teachers, we're not talking about dividing and conquering and thinking about my students and your students. Instead, all the students are our students. And like Paula said, we both know the aims, we both know the goals, and then here's the secret. We both plan lessons together. And when it comes to the planning piece, that's where the magic happens for co-teaching, so that general and special ed teachers are thinking about the goals of a student, maybe with a significant disability, and the content for the class. And we figure out how do we make those two things come together so all kids are improving. And so the things that it's not kids at the back table with a special ed teacher. It's not one person teaching and the other person standing and holding up a wall. It's actually two educators engaged in direct instruction of all students. Does that answer your question, Charmaine?
Yes, thank you. And I think that really helps because even though co-teaching has been around for a while, I think some, educators might not have had any specific training on it. And that's what I love about your book, because to me, if they look at your book and they go through the daily kind of prompts that you give in your book, I mean, it's amazing how much they can learn. And these are like practical ideas that they can certainly implement the day after they've read it, right?
The day of. Right,
true.
Absolutely. Just because I'm that greedy. No, but no, it's true. And they're like, some of them are 2 and 3 pages. But I like that idea. Speaking of greedy, I like what Julie's saying about being a little bit indulgent. Is that, to me, and you said the secret kind of it is the planning and coming together. To me, the lovely outcome that we don't talk enough about, and it's something that even Julie's explored in her own research, is let's think about this as a catalyst for a more exciting environment. And that's where families can really, when they're looking for those advocacy statements and they're looking for ways into this conversation, to talk about, look, I want my child is attached to some of these resources, right? And so, for lack of a better way of saying it, I would love for those resources to create better learning experiences for all students. And that's what co-teaching allows us to do, right? So that we come in, as Julie said, with those shared goals and aims, and we say, hey, we're not just looking for ways to include and support, these 4 students in particular. We're thinking about how could the synergy and the energy and the creativity create all kinds of better outcomes, not just academic outcomes, but because there's 2 of us, 2 different personalities, because we can sort of, unpack the day and 2 different styles, and some reflection. We can think about emotional, social outcomes, things that are sometimes hard to get to with one person. We're certainly doing it as individual teachers, but it's everything's easier, with two.
Yes, I think so. And we do have a comment here from Kathleen. So let me pull it up. She says, hoping that the speakers will address disability studies in education and the intersection with inclusive education. So I'm sure both of you, have been with Doug Bicklin, and I think he's a person that comes to mind when I think about disability studies. But if both of you want to comment about that.
Yeah, I love that question. I think in education, we're not talking enough about disability studies. And so just to give a little bit of background about what is disability studies, it's a different way of looking at special education. So it moves away from this medical model. So most of us are pretty familiar with the medical model of special education, which is remove and remediate. So remove a child, fix them, and return them. And disability studies in education really basically is a 180 when we think about what is special education. And it's instead, how do we value diversity? And diversity meaning kids with disabilities are adding to the diversity of a classroom and making those classrooms better. And so when we think about disability studies in education, it's an approach to looking at disability that's pretty much opposite of traditional special education models. Paula, do you want to share more about that?
Well, and I think one thing that's helpful to think about the intersections and then bring it back to co-teaching is to think about, who has been at the helm and whose voices have been heard. So to think about how disability studies has informed inclusive education and it's the related literature is, of course, we're thinking more about nothing about us without us. So when we understanding disability and teaching it to students, for example, in teacher preparation, we should be thinking about what kinds of texts, who's actually teaching, who's, what kinds of words are they being influenced by. I can't tell you how long it was before there was, when I was teaching, I had not written anything yet, but when I was shopping for autism, books about autism, textbooks, there was, except for maybe a side quote from Temple Grandin, there were no voices of folks on the autism spectrum in those texts. That's problematic. So there is some, I think Christy Casa Hendrickson has done a piece. I'm trying to think, I did a piece with Sue Rubin years ago, but I'm not sure if it talks about teaching particularly or just writing. But there isn't actually an emerging conversation about who's teaching at the university level, who's teaching teachers. And there are some articles, some posts, some conversation going even about this idea of collaborating and co-teaching more at the university level, but should be happening at all levels about how do, what kinds of voices are front and center, and how do we make sure that students and teachers are being taught and are understanding the words and experiences of folks with disabilities themselves. So I think I should know, but I don't know Christy's piece, but I'm pretty sure she's written formally about that. But looking for, looking for some of those kinds of experiences as a way to think about how could this look in my own teaching experience.
Yeah, and I think as a parent, one of the lessons, that I've learned along the way is that, when my child was younger, I could kind of tell his story and almost be his voice. But not really. I mean, then I realized I could be more of the microphone for him or to help him take hold of that microphone. And when, I think about the people that I heard when Dylan was 3 years old that changed everything for me, with people like Judith Snow and Norman Kuntz. And it's like the adults, the disabled adults are our best teachers. And so I'm really hoping that we bring more of their voices in the conversations, because that's really, really an important part.
Can I just throw out too that Dan Habib's work has highlighted, Micah teaching,
Right.
And there's some good. That's the one I was trying to think of and was elusive to me. But that Micah Feldman's work and his teaching at Syracuse University, and he talks a little bit about that in Intelligent Lives. So there are even some texts out there that kind of intersect with our topic today.
Oh, exactly.
So just to add, Micah and I have co-taught together. So Micah and I have co-taught at Syracuse University. So what was so fascinating is to utilize all the things we're talking about around co-teaching and doing it with Micah, who's a person with a disability. And I really think the semesters that I co-taught with Micah, my students learn more than any other semester. And so just thinking about how additive it is to have the voices from margin to center when it comes to both teaching and inclusive practices.
Oh, exactly. And Jessica had a question. She wants to know about the difference between co-teaching and push-in services, the amount of time in the classroom. Is co-teaching 2 educators in 1 classroom full-time?
I can start, Paula, you can add, I guess. I love that question because a lot of people use the word co-teaching and they think it's all day, every day, equals
bell to bell.
Bell to bell, Monday through Friday. And we don't agree. We mean use these practices anytime. So let's imagine that I'm a 7th grade chemistry teacher and Paula is a special ed teacher and she comes in 1 period a day and we co-teach. We still call that co-teaching. And so the reason being is we want you to use these practices whether you're with your co-teacher for a half an hour a day or you're bell to bell Monday through Friday. All these practices can work. We recognize it's more complex in the middle and high school when you might be, we both taught in middle and high school, when I might have multiple co-teaching partners, but that's even more reason to know and understand these practices so you can use them with multiple partners in a day or a week.
And one thing I'll say just give a really practical tip for those that are educators or again, families that want to be able to provide a specific example. And in the book, I think it's especially in the stations teaching day, we have a lot of, kind of specific examples about what that structure can look like. If your speech path is coming in, if your OT is available, and if people aren't always bell to bell. But one of the things I talk about is when you have just smaller bits of time, then you have to be more patterned in the way that you do the work. So for example, if I know that you are, again, I'll talk about a speech path or a special ed teacher that primarily, I know you're going to be available to me on Friday mornings, that it might be even more useful than it might be at other times, although I think it's oftentimes useful to plan in patterns so that you might say to yourself, in mathematics, I'm a 6th grade teacher, and on Thursdays and Fridays, I always use station teaching in math because first of all, I think it's a really good way to deliver supports to my diverse learners. It's a really good way to be able to universally design or differentiate instruction, but it's also really helpful for any collaborative partner I may have. So if I know that I have access to those folks, we can plan what stations look like in general, and then every week we can kind of plug in. We don't have to kind of replan the whole lesson. That if you're able to come in, ELL teacher, special ed teacher, you will always facilitate the stations. I will always be at a station engaged in a direct lesson. And if you are not available to facilitate, the students hopefully know that pattern well enough to kind of be able to work inside that structure without a facilitator. But if you're there, even better. So I think those kinds of patterns, or maybe we're always going to use an anchor teaching structure on those days. Or maybe if I'm going to do writing conferences on those days so that if you're available to sort of observe and coach students who are writing independently while I'm pulling out those writers, great. If you're not there, it could still work. And I know there's going to be a great pun coming.
Well, I'm wondering, Paula, if you're meaning that co-teaching is almost an umbrella term and you're actually putting things like Pushin services and other supports kind of under the umbrella of co-teaching. I thought that's maybe what you meant, was it?
It is what I meant. And I also feel like it helps us cut out a lot of steps. And, when you have those patterns in planning, you don't have to keep going back to the drawing board and saying, we didn't have time to plan this week. We kind of know what's happening. So right. I will see your prop and I up you with one scissors. Yeah. So in other words, it's not always perfect in that way. But again, I've known, again, social workers, they always come in Monday morning, or they always, a speech path says, I'll come in Monday morning because I know you're engaged in some kind of active or collaborative review activity. And that way I can sort of eavesdrop on students and take some data. And I can count on that experience being available. Not that I'm just going to come in and you're going to be talking to students. And now I've got 20 minutes where I could have been elsewhere. This is not supportive. So think about patterns. And I think that's a good way to support folks that maybe have lots of partners and they don't have time for planning a big lesson every single week.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous way, because I think back on the days when I co-taught with, and it was usually like a speech pathologist, OT, or the special ed teacher. And we tried to meet once a week, but I love your idea about trying to pick one type of co-teaching and use that, and that will just, kind of naturally, be embedded, and that will be helping all the kids in the class. So I think that's an awesome tip. And Lisa had a question. She wanted to know if you'd be able to discuss the role of the paraprofessional in co-taught classrooms.
Oh, it's one of our favorite questions. I feel like we should get dressed up for this, Julie.
What did you say?
We should get dressed up for this question, because this is
okay.
I like this question.
I like it.
Let's get formal. We have our Apple t-shirt, but I think we should go to Apple vest.
Plus, I was getting a little chilly here in the summer.
I was not on my sleeves. I was just getting chilly in my torso. So that's why
my car was kind of cooling down. Hold on.
We have a little section in the book just on paraprofessionals, because we love the question. And especially for families, I think it's helpful to think about things like, this is in our advocacy to talk about what are some different ways that paraprofessionals can, behave in the classroom. What can their role look like? And so we talk about, even though in the literature, using a paraprofessional in those roles is not considered a pure co-teaching model, it doesn't mean that we can't use the same structures, that we can't benefit from some of the same kinds of collaborative planning. So depending on what different students in the classroom need, there may be different ways of using paraprofessionals to not just meet the needs of students with disabilities, but other students as well. So for example, we talk about just, first of all, that planning being really key with paraprofessionals. And we have like a little lesson plan in there, so that we know that we really want to be, the more that you want to be purposeful in that role to support the classroom in general, the more you're going to have to be very direct in what the behaviors of both professionals look like. So if every day you want to have some co-teaching element to your circle time, your morning meeting, and I think that's what we have the lesson plan up, that we would want to make sure that we were clear that, hey, the first priority is making sure that these 3 students with identified needs have what they need. They have their assistive technology, that they're, that the day is going all right, that any direct support that's needed is put into place. And if and only then those kinds of direct supports aren't necessary for this 15-minute lesson, then it'd be really great as a way to differentiate instruction for those students and anybody else is, could you actually, as I'm reading the story, could you actually be showing on the felt board the story taking place with a different modality, so that students who maybe are going to be asked to use those materials later can see what it looks like and use these really great sensory materials. So in some classrooms, you might even do some kind of a split parallel model, where maybe not every day, because we want to benefit from what the classroom teacher knows and what kinds of strategies she's using, like her think alouds and introducing vocabulary, but every now and then, to mix things up and to get into smaller constellations, a paraprofessional may have a small group, maybe not as big of a group as the general ed teacher, and the general ed teacher may have a small group, and they may read the story in 2 smaller groups occasionally, just to make sure that students have more access to an adult and they can ask and answer questions and have their voices on the table, things like that. And the more that we do that, we build the skills of the paraprofessional, so that they are learning some of these strategies for working with students. And it also gives the general ed teacher time to work with a smaller group of individuals, including that student with a disability, so that because we would not necessarily give the paraprofessional a group with that particular child in every iteration of this. So you're looking for ways to use these strategies and these individuals to not just meet the needs of that learner, but you're thinking really critically about how can the use of another professional raise the bar in this space, and how does it allow us to have a wider range of formats and materials and different constellations and different experiences and moments that might be harder or not even possible if I didn't have two people here. But Julie's written more about this. You go ahead, Julie.
Well, the only thing I would add is for parents that are listening, why does this matter? And the reason it matters is daily, the support that your child receives. If it's that side-by-side support, we know that's not the most effective way to support students. And so very often it's called inclusion, and it's, a paraprofessional Velcroed to your child. And so one of the things we want people to be thinking about, and I'm glad Lisa asked this question, is what kinds of supports are seamless so that children aren't relying on that adult support, and so that adults are being utilized to really increase the learning for all. So Paula gave a lot of really concrete examples, but I just wanted to make sure that people understand, why does this matter? And it matters. I think it's one of the biggest pieces to what I would call fabulous inclusion. When I walk in and I just am like, oh, what I see is all educators engaged with all kinds of learners. Nobody's ability grouped or separated out. And they've planned to make sure all human beings are being utilized, all adult human beings are being utilized to be effective. And what that does is it moves away from sometimes that very stigmatizing support that we can see in classrooms, where it's just, a child with a disability and a paraprofessional next to them. That's the least effective way. So this is actually a backdoor way to get to some of the best inclusive experiences that you can get for your children.
And I'll just piggyback on that. I so wish I had a pig to put on my back right now. That would.
I have a cat hat, but I mean, does it look like a pig at all?
I'll take that. I'm going to take that right now. So, the one thing that I think we have to make clear about this example is sometimes folks will say, well, if the student has needs where they can be so capable when they're not being directly supported, do they really need a paraprofessional? And the answer is sometimes they still do. Sometimes that space would still need paraprofessional support. Just because you are taking notes or graphic notes while the teacher's lecturing, or you're modeling for them a new note-taking structure, or you are indeed, doing the retelling on the felt board, or again, one teach, one make multisensory, you're adding in funny sound effects for that element of novelty. That doesn't mean that that person's extra. In other words, what we're doing now is, instead of providing that sort of, that sitting next to the person and hands over hand prompting and remember to listen, we're actually creating a lesson that's more dynamic. That is the support. That is still support. It's just indirect. And that, for a lot of kids, is more important than and more of the linchpin, right, for their success, that they have a lesson that works well for them. That's the universal design element that helps the lesson to sort of pop and jump. So we need to point out that those are supports, even though it looks different than, standing at a lot of proximity and a lot of direct cues.
Right. And remember, and Paula and I are doing props today and things like that, also to demonstrate this concept of, while one person's teaching, one is making it multisensory. Our goal in education is to help make learning sticky, right? We want all kids to really gain new knowledge. And Paula used the word novelty. I talk a lot about fun theory. The more fun that's going on in a classroom, the more students are learning. And so when you've got multiple adults in a classroom, it allows for all of that.
Bravo!
Yes.
Better myself.
And Micah's here. Micah says hi.
Micah, you're the star of this. I can't believe it.
Co-teach with us, Micah.
And Lisa is in Texas, and she said, this all seems like a magical wonderland. Texas schools rarely have enough hands to cover classrooms. And so, when you look at, and I look at, rural districts in Idaho that, the special ed director is also the special ed teacher, is also the bus driver. So how can schools look at the staff that they have and kind of reassign roles. And I think that can be one way, but I would love to hear what you guys say about that.
So I put my unicorn horn on for the magical wonderland if you missed that connection. Many schools, and this is what I do a lot of work with, and Paula does too, where we look at how resources are being utilized. So when we've got a bunch of kids and a bunch of teachers in separate, segregated classrooms and settings, then we're using all of those resources there. What Paula and I talk a lot about is bringing those kids, obviously, and those resources back to general education settings. And again, we're talking about anytime there's more than one student, more than one adult in a classroom. And so even in Texas, I've spent a lot of time in Texas. I've spent a lot of time lots of places. There are general education classrooms that have got more than one educator. And so these are the co-teaching practices. And let's imagine that you have one teacher doing this work. It's still really possible to utilize a lot of different structures and strategies to support all learners in inclusive classrooms.
And you can even be creative. Like, when you have to think, like Julie said, you have to look not just at a classroom, but you have to look big picture at all of the resources in the school. You might be surprised. So for example, I was working with a first grade team and they said, well, we don't know what to do because she's kind of torn between these 3 first grades, all at literacy, this literacy hour, whatever it was, 90 minutes, this block. And so we had to kind of take a step back because ELL was visiting, and there was a speech path coming in and out. But we said, let's just look at all the resources. And what if we all collaborated around first grade lessons? So instead of it being like, how do I get here, here, and here? We said, everybody's going to have joint kind of lesson plans each week around literacy instruction. So that sometimes we might even have stations that go across the classrooms. So that if we have a speech path that's available, that's one of the potential spaces for kids with and without disabilities, and any kid in any one of those classrooms might be accessing that space. And in addition, kids without disabilities might access other teachers and other spaces. We can think about enrichment. We can think about those supports around ELL. So the planning is more, is definitely different. The other thing that I think about Michael Giangreco is we're all big fans of Michael. Mary Beth Doyle, those folks are doing the great work around paraprofessionals. And he's been writing a lot more about this, especially when it comes to paras. And one of his, I guess this piece is probably 3 years old now or 2 years old, but that later piece, Julie, where he talks about, folks really wanted him to write a little evaluation to sort of determine, does this student need a paraprofessional? That was and he said, I got called in so often to write that evaluation, like not to write the evaluation, to create the tool. So how do you determine if a student needs it? And he said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want people to think broadly about all the resources in the school. Sometimes the answer is not to get another paraprofessional. Sometimes the answer is, if you think differently about these 7 paraprofessionals in the district or school, whatever, how big the space is, you could, if you planned differently and you thought about your support per unit, you could have another teacher. Right, three paraprofessionals, you could buy yourself another teacher. So it does require a broader conversation, and it requires definitely an all hands on deck conversation. Who's all available? Again, in the whole school, and thinking differently about, do our administrators ever support planning? And we write about that a little bit too. Do they ever come in for bits and pieces when we need to come together? Are there, what professionals have never had an opportunity to co-teach, to collaborate? How do we use families and our volunteers? Is it sort of catch as catch can and how we've always done business? Or if we know there are certain models that we want to see more in our schools, are there ways to do this? So for example, I was just in this, doing a co-teaching workshop, and this woman raised her hand and she said co-teaching was really new where they were. And so the principal, and I want to say it was like maybe a physical education teacher and a couple of paraprofessionals would take this larger group of kids, and I think it was maybe once a week or every 2 weeks or something like that, and they would do this really cool 90-minute lesson or something like that. But they had to plan it, and they'd plan a bunch of them in advance, and they would come together and have this big group of kids engage in these movement-oriented stuff and artistic kinds of cool stuff. And meanwhile, the co-teachers would get together and they would do some co-planning, and they would talk to each other about, it was kind of their space and their time to catch up and learn from each other. So that's a planning, idea, but I thought that's super creative. And I've never, we actually write about something similar in our book. That was a little bit different because they were getting time to kind of talk together, but that's unusual. They made that up. So, bloom where you're planted. Bloom where you're planted. There are folks who we could probably use differently. It may require some front loading, in advance. When this happens, how will we use that support?
Right. And I know in my son's elementary school, and this was, 20 some years ago, but what they did is they looked at all their staff, their gifted and talented teacher, the Title I teacher, the speech therapist, paras, and they looked at how could we assign people grade levels. So instead of the special ed teacher feeling like she had to cover every grade level in the elementary building to co-teach with, instead they looked at the other staff and they cross-trained each other in the different aspects of, their specialty. And it was a wonderful way to meet the needs of all the kids. And not only parents of kids, on IEPs, but other parents were really appreciative of this new way of looking at how we can use our staff. So it does take some of that out of the box thinking sometimes. And Lisa, I'd be happy, to give you some more resources, and I can put some articles in the post when we're done. That could also give you some additional ideas. But I think your question is really an important one, because I think a lot of schools feel that way. And now if you have some ideas of look at what another building did, how can we replicate that or tweak that to work in our building? And Robin had a question about parents, and she says, how can I as a parent push for my child's team to use these techniques in a way that will be accepted and not be seen as a crazy parent trying to rule their classroom?
Yeah, so I don't know if Paula and I can tell you how to not be seen as crazy. I don't think we're the right people to answer that, because
no either.
No, but, I get your point. I think parents influencing the practices in schools is very, very difficult. I'm just going to start there. And there are lots of little ways that you can help to influence. So the first, I've got a few ideas, and Paula, you can add to them, is ask. Say, I would love to support co-teaching in this school. How can I help? Like a blanket, what could I do? How could I help? Let's have a brainstorming session or a problem-solving session. Paula already mentioned having parents come in and volunteer to just allow teachers to get together and co-plan for a little example, right? So asking, how can I help? The second is praising and noticing and writing thank you notes when you see really incredible practices. So as educators, we know that it can feel really difficult at times because we're in the media and all kinds of places. We're really in a time and place that can feel really hard. And so families really bolstering up teachers by saying, this looks great. Thank you for this. I noticed this. I appreciated this. That goes a long way. Another thing, and Paula and I would probably agree on this, in the past 10 years, the best work that I've done around co-teaching involves this book. So literally asking or giving, asking administrators if it's possible for folks to read the book. And it's because we spent 10 years writing this book, and we've studied best practices in co-teaching, and we put it all in one place. So on this Facebook Live thing, we can't do enough to explain how to do it. But what we've been doing is administrators have been doing book clubs. And Paula and I have been working all over the country where the whole school district has read the book. And then we come and do a little bit more tweaking and a little more support. And it ends up to be a powerful learning experience where people understand what even is co-teaching and then how to engage in co-teaching. So Paula, what would you add?
Yeah, I would say, we're just, I think all three of us, our heart just breaks a little to hear that question, because I don't want it. I know it, I know we've heard these stories a million times, and it's just heartbreaking that you even phrase it that way. And I know why you did. So I'm sorry that has happened, because it shouldn't. And the fact that if you've ever felt positioned that way, you're doing a great job because you're fighting for what's right for your child. Thank you. So 3 things. I would say, if you know of a model, like maybe you came to this workshop today because you actually, heard about this in your community, or you have a young child and this other preschool's doing it or something. So if you actually know of a model, and are you aware of what, this other district's doing? And I'm just wondering if you're aware and if you've ever connected with them. And some administrators will be interested in that, some not. The other thing is with that is if there's ever anything like that where you can say, hey, there's this inclusive conference, like Julie's doing this big summit in Milwaukee coming up, and she has her conference in Syracuse. But, if there's something coming up that is tangential to these issues, and you're on a PTO or you're on some decision-making body in your district, to say, hey, can we send some folks to learn about those kinds of techniques? So if you know of a model concretely, definitely, that thing about kids, if they don't learn as we teach as they learn. And that's true of teachers too. If it's not coming through the way that we're teaching, how can we do it differently? How do we market this differently? The second thing is, do you have any concrete idea about the teaching itself? And I often say this about adaptations in general. If you actually know of a way that it could be done and you have a physical example about what the test could look like, I know some of you are saying, I've tried that, I've done it, but some people have not tried that. And to actually show a picture, bring an image, bring an art, and say, actually, this exact thing I think would work for my child. This app I think we could use for writing instruction. This actually would be helpful for during social studies when he's struggling a lot, to start to draft a product. So if you know of a specific way that co-teaching could be helpful to your student, so you think, I think he could do just fine in science if there was a co-teaching where there was at least check-in support or there's some co-planning going on. So if you have a specific way of thinking about that, I think that could be helpful. And then finally, I like Julie's idea about the how can I be helpful? This is not exactly co-teaching in the way we've been talking about it, but I've written several times about sort of this coffee klatch idea where parents come in. I've done it mostly in elementary schools, but they come in maybe once a month, every other week, and you ask for volunteers to come in and create. You get a little group together, and the teachers give you. Somebody talked about, it seems like it's too overwhelming. But any products that are related to good UDL or differentiation, we would have these parents come in for a coffee klatch, and they would teachers would give them if there's graphic organizers that they need made, if they want cool models done, even sometimes bulletin boards that are great visual supports, if they want adapted literature, anything. And I've done that a couple times, and that has really helped a lot of schools to say, if we helped you with those things, the other things you're doing, would that free up time and space for you to have collaborative conversations? Would that free up space and time for you to, so the PTO can help shepherd that. Could that then provide some of the time that you're looking for some of these other endeavors? So they're imperfect solutions, but they might be worth a shot.
Oh, I think so. And yeah, I just love that last idea because I can see, a lot of parents getting into doing some hands-on things like that and feeling like they are making a difference, for their child or for other classrooms. And, I think one of the things that I talk about to parents is to not always be seen as a special interest group, that your only interest is your child on the IEP and what can be done for your child. But to talk about co-teaching is going to benefit everyone in the classroom, and for parents to find as many allies of so-called typical parents and bring them with you when you have conversations. And so the staff understands that this is something that is broader than just disabled students, that we're looking at changing how we do things in our building. And the more that parents can engage community members and parents of kids without disabilities, I've found that to be really helpful too.
Well, and kind of what I like about that idea is it kind of works both ways, doesn't it? So that if I'm we would get general ed, special ed parents, for lack of a better way of saying it, and they would, anyone that was a teacher or just likes doing that kind of stuff, was kind of addicted to Michael's, And so just anyone that come in that likes making materials. And what was neat about that, what was cool, is that what you're talking about should actually happen, but the reverse happened too. Hey, why wouldn't I? It's interesting to know how students with disabilities would actually access this lesson on the planet by using this visual that I made. So it also teaches parents, general ed parents, about UDL itself. Oh, I get it now. So we end up kind of getting to know each other, educating each other. And so I'm not just concerned about my student without a disability, but I'm also thinking about, oh, these ideas would work well for everybody. So we kind of teach each other. Yeah, and then I just want to throw in a little plug for a resource that Julie and I have out there that I think will work beautifully here. I have a little web series called Off the Page, and you can find it on YouTube. You can put my name into YouTube, and Off the Page. And the videos are about 5 minutes long. And one of the first ones that I did was about the book, and it's one of our favorite sections. It's where we talk about co-teacher goal setting. And that clip, I think Julie and I highlighted the ideas from our book and the tool that we use in the book. And anybody that would look at that video and see what potential goals would look like for a co-teaching team, like a school board, for example, would quickly understand that if you're creating healthy goals, you are thinking about everybody, because those examples are not just about individual students with disabilities. So that little 5-minute clip from Off the Page about co-teaching goal setting, that'll give you a sense about what good targets look like for a team.
Yes, definitely. And talking about your book, Jessica had a question. She wanted to know if your book addresses how a parent can help facilitate a shift to co-teaching in a classroom. Is co-teaching realistic for a scenario where only one student in the classroom is receiving additional services, or is there another structure better?
So our book, I think, talks about how all stakeholders can be involved in creating inclusive schools. How does the audio sound? I'm getting a little bit of weird feedback. Are you, Charmaine?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. So the book would be a great start for families to use. And the next question is, well, what if there's only one student receiving services? I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of want to back up to a few questions ago, and it relates to this, which is we often think that services mean a special ed teacher is standing next to your child or sitting next to your child. And when we start to engage in co-teaching, we do something called role release. And I don't know if it was Michael Giangreco, someone used that term role release in the literature to describe what real co-teaching looks like, which is, instead of thinking that a special ed teacher needs to come in and give minutes of instruction, instead we embed those goals right within the context of education. So I'll give an example, a really simple one, but I was in a classroom where somebody, occupational therapist, came in to work on pencil grip and how to write, right? And so she came in and someone had asked about Pushin services. So I asked some questions about, tell me why that person's coming in. And they said, well, for the OT minutes, for the IEP, and they were trying to explain. And we talked and did a little problem solving session, which, by the way, one of my favorite sections in the book is our problem solving sessions. But we did a problem solving session, and they realized that how to hold a pencil is important, and the general education teacher could easily cue all the students many times a day instead of having that 15-minute moment where she came in and used a few different techniques. So the techniques that she knew, she had to teach to the general education teacher, but now we could embed those skills in more and more and more. And so it's, instead of this medical idea of remove and remediate, now we just embed, and kids actually have access to services for more and more of the day. Does that make sense?
Well, and I think, too, it goes back to a couple of questions ago about if this is a model that you want to pursue and you are an administrator or you are a parent that wants to advocate, think about, why is there just one student with an identified need in that classroom? Have you grouped that to think about? Sometimes people group that way because they think that's natural proportions, and we want to make sure we spread all the students out into 4 different classrooms. When if we actually put a few students with some, I'm not saying, 10 kids, I'm not saying, violating natural proportions to the point where it's no longer an inclusive classroom. But if we did think really critically about grouping, then we could afford in a different way a more full-fledged co-teaching model. So it does kind of ask us to back up a little bit and look at the larger structure. So as a parent, you might ask those questions. Is there a way to provide, is there a way to group students in such a way that we can then group our services and supports in a more creative way? And so that's helpful to think about this time of year before everything's actually set in stone with placements. And so that can be really a powerful way to help them consider something that they may not be thinking about, just to say, what about is my child, would that allow you to serve students differently? Now, you asking the question about your child, some educators may not have considered that previously. And so that's helpful to think about as well. But to Julie's point too, we have to start thinking about chunking down the day too. So that some points, peer supports may be the most, helpful piece. And in some cases, services might be about materials. And sometimes it might be actually about the kinds of cues or even technologies that we're putting into place for somebody. So it's not to say that some kids don't need a lot of support that's direct and, is a human being, but a human being is not equivalent support, in other words, and sometimes a human being is the last thing a student needs. They've had too many human beings, too many cooks in the kettle and all that stuff. So we should just break it down task by task. What does the day look like? And if you think about high school kids that I support a lot, they may need a lot of support at the end of the day when they're really struggling and the anxiety's coming up. And in the morning when they are engaged in things that are more connected to their interest areas and they're in the mathematics where they're the strongest, they need almost nothing. So we have to really chunk it down by task and activity to be sure that when we talk about support, it's not a blanket. It's just not sort of hanging that on, because we also want to make sure that students get the right amount of support. What do we say? Goldilocks, not too much, not too little, just right. And all of this talk about, Goldilocks, thinking about that hot porridge, just makes me want to, switch seasons. I don't know about you. When I think about hot porridge, I think about the winter time. Are you getting chilly?
I was getting chilly, and it's made me think about kind of matching.
I never want to be out of sync with my co-teacher. I just want to feel like.
I mean, and somebody asked, how do you support co-teaching? And if this is in your budget, getting matching theme related. Oh, I got to back up so you can tell. Matching theme related. We look good in this. And I like to have sweaters over sweaters to look bulky. That's a goal that I have.
I think our parents that are saying that they're having these reactions sometimes and they already think you're off the, just walk in and start changing into these outfits. They already think, this is the unusual parent, just add, you might as well just go for it. That's what I say.
Or I was thinking just do subtle things like have a yay inclusion mug that you're drinking out of.
And a neck tattoo. A neck tattoo, Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And celebrate all the good things, right?
Yeah, celebrate. Can we speak to that for a second?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because we hardly do enough of that, I think.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So parents can be really instrumental. So I'm not plugging the video again because, I just love to see myself on camera. But I only made 2 of the off the page videos for the co-teaching book so far. And one of them is on celebration. And the reason I want to have people go out and watch it right away is because there's a drumming cat in it. And I worked very hard to get that drumming cat. So, but anyway, off the page, it's just called Celebrate. A drumming cat, yes. And in general, we love cats in general. But what's really cool about that idea, is the last idea in the book, is that whether you're a teacher or parent, we are so overwhelmed with all of these different aspects of our advocacy and our work, we forget, just like we do in daily life and our own personal relationships, to stop and say what's going right. So let me speak just for a minute to teachers. Teachers, our advice is do not have a planning meeting. Do not sit down together formally, whether that's your once a week session or your small sessions, without forcing yourself, even when it's the hardest, to say what's one thing that's going right. Even if it means he didn't swear at us today, that's a going right. If it means that, because sometimes the kids with significant needs that Julie and I have worked with mostly in our career, it can be, the growth can be hard to see sometimes. It's very slow growth sometimes. So to say, I know it's small, but he did sit for 12 minutes. And I don't think that's happened before. And I think that's a cue of him being more relaxed. If we don't point that out to each other, no one else is going to come through the door and sort of, and award us with this information. So it's really important that we take time to pat each other on the back and say, that was the best timed lesson we ever had for Parallel. Or, I feel like that parent, we really crusted with this parent, and we got a positive thing going now, and whatever it is, just build on that. So, and then in general, take some time to find some celebration. So I'll let them, we can watch the video to talk about more ways to celebrate, but for families, this is so helpful too. And I've even used it as a tool to kind of be a little bit, subversive. So like what I might say is, oh my gosh, like somebody's just really giving up on this. And I say, I know that you don't see that this is working out, this 8th grade social studies thing, but I'm telling you, my kid came home and he was telling me these 3 things about the Civil War or about, liberation movements. And even if it's a little bit, embellished, a lot of families what a lot of teachers don't understand, and they're so busy themselves, is they often look at a comparison between either the students I've had with disabilities before or the students in front of me. He looks nothing like them. He is not learning what they're learning. So all I can see is this is not appropriate placement. Part of the celebration of a family can let them know, outside of your eyes, here's what I see. He's so proud to go to school. I've never seen that before. He comes home, he starts reading a book, even though he doesn't know how to read that book, but he's got his book open. Do you know that I've never seen that? He's talking about mitosis, and he wanted to show me this video of it. I'm not sure if he understands this element, but here's what he did know. Those are celebrations that we can bring in. And maybe we shouldn't have to do that. Excuse me. Cheerleading. In my world, we wouldn't have to. But the fact of the matter is that's where we are. So part of the celebration is telling folks, here's what I've noticed, and here is what I'm excited about. So I know parents are doing that already, but keep doing it because I think it can make a difference. Does it always make a difference? Probably not, but it might. And we got to do it for each other in the field. And your co-teacher, now you got someone, whether it's part-time, full-time, you now have somebody around. You can share this energy. And this teaching in general can be hard. Have a piece of cake, get out your noisemaker. You got to celebrate.
Yes, truly. And somebody could be celebrating soon because they can win a copy of your book. And all they have to do is type in the word co-teaching in the comments, and you'll be entered into our contest. And I'll be putting a question up this afternoon that if you answer the question, you'll get another entry. If you answer the question Friday and Saturday, you'll get more. And if you're the first 5 to answer the questions that we're going to be posting, you get 5 times the entry. So Sunday we'll be having Siri or Alexa drawing the name of the winner, but I'm looking forward to giving away one of Paula and Julie's co-teaching books. And before we wrap up today, I want to make sure that Julie, that you also talk about your new podcast that's on YouTube, and also your Syracuse leadership training that's coming up.
Okay, perfect. So really quickly, the Inclusion Podcast has just started, and what it is a podcast for all stakeholders who are interested in inclusive education. And I just did one. I just did it yesterday on co-teaching, and Paula and I today are recording another one on co-teaching that you're not going to want to miss. So if you want to know how to do that, if you go to iTunes and type in the Inclusion Podcast, it comes up, or my name. So it's on iTunes and ready to go there. And then you mentioned at Syracuse University, we have a live event, and Paula has been a speaker at this event, and she was phenomenal. We bring in some of the best speakers in the country around inclusive education, and it's for about 200 school administrators, leaders, and parents to learn about inclusive education. And I find this to be a game changer. So if you're a parent and you've got a district that you would like to invite there, if you go to my website, and it's www.inclusiveschooling.com, then you go to live events. So www.inclusiveschooling.com, go to live events, and then you can learn all about the Syracuse University Leadership Institute. It's a live workshop, and it's just all about the why and the how of inclusive education.
So great. And I know I love Paula's website also, that always has a wealth of information. And Paula, one of the articles that you've written that I've given to a lot of parents is, how teachers can change things up instead of just doing so much lecture, and how kids can be actively involved. So those kinds of articles are such golden nuggets for both parents and educators, I think.
Well, and a couple of, if you don't mind, Sherman, can I also just reference a couple of other resources connected to this work that are free for folks? So the websites are great. We got the conference, and we also have a website for the book that's called Coteaching Classroom. So it's www.coteachclassroom.com. There's not a lot of resources on it at this point, but that's where, thank you, honey. That's where you can get more information on the book. And you can also get some of the videos that I've talked about today, including, if you're wondering why we're wearing these outfits, besides that they're fabulous, if you've never seen our rap video, you can find our Coteaching rap on the website, Coteaching Classroom. It's also on YouTube. You can't unsee it. That's the problem. Once you've seen it, it's in your brain.
Oops, we just lost Paula.
We lost Paula, so I can finish her sentence because
I'll bring her back. Go ahead.
If an administrator buys 10 books or more, which many of them are doing, we lost you for a second, Paula.
I know, go ahead, yeah. That's better.
If they buy 10 books or more, they get the PowerPoint for free. And so this has been so wonderful because people are using the books to do big book clubs in their districts. And then they've also got the PowerPoint presentation. So people are learning this stuff without, it's a little bit sad to not have Paula and I present for it, but I'll tell you, it's a really great deal because instead you get the PowerPoint and people can do it themselves, which we're thrilled about.
And just get your own sweaters. You'll be fine. Show the rap video. But anyway, it's 107 slides. It covers the whole book. So for those of you that are out doing the work, we want you to have this material. We want you to co-teach. We want you to collaborate. So hopefully some of you will get to take advantage of that.
Well, and Paula, I didn't know if you could go get your copy of your book behind you.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Of course. Oh, this is a little awkward. I didn't know I was going to be standing up, but just want me to go get it back here.
Yeah, if you could get your copy.
I didn't know I just put on any old thing. I didn't realize that you were going to see my boxer. This is my outfit when I co-plan. Wear these homemade apple sweater boxer shorts, but I guess now everyone knows. So that I think was a shameful ploy to see my full outfit. But again, I know you're probably wishing you had them, but it's just a Sharpie and some Hanes. You too can have this wardrobe piece.
Yeah, and Paula and I have matching Apple underwear, but for some reason she has my pair, which sounds more scandalous than it is.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here. I love learning in an entertaining and fun way. And you guys just, are such wonderful examples of what can happen and how all kids in classrooms can be supported and make it fun and make it sticky. So I just want to thank you so much for carving out your time. And if you have any closing words that you'd like to share with our audience.
Sure, I can start. I just want to thank you, Charmaine, for the work you're doing and thank your audience because anytime I've done one of these live shows, I've gotten such lovely comments. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And Paula's and my goal is really to make the most inclusive schools and structures possible. So just want people to know that we are here behind you, supporting you, whether you're parents, whether you're educators, whether you're administrators. We're right here beside you, donning our apple sweaters. And lastly, I'd like to say that I think this color of bright orange, Paula, on you looks really nice. So.
I never noticed before. This is probably going to be I have 5 teenage girls at my house right now, and I thought I'll just walk around downtown with these kids today and just wear this and see how it goes with these teenagers out there appreciating my look. Maybe
they're gonna love it.
Be the next thing. My words would be, you know, as Julie said, this is just in our hearts that you would feel like that this could be helpful to you in ultimately supporting the goal of kids being included. So I would say to some of the questions we had today, bloom where you're planted. It feels overwhelming when you hear it sounds like la la land, and you probably can't do every bit of it. But is there one part of it that you could take on? So I would say bloom where you're planted and pick one thing that you've heard today, whether it's sharing one of these video resources, whether it's connecting with a PTO. What could you just jot a note to your school board and share something as a resource? It might be a book club idea that Julie referenced. Maybe it's just calling or emailing a therapist today and saying, what do you think of this? So just don't be overwhelmed. Pick something, move on.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to remind people that we are here every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. Next week, we have another author with us, and she has just released her new book, The Differently Wired Child. And she'll be joining us from Amsterdam and talking about her book and the lessons and the insights that she's gained in her journey of homeschooling her son. So I invite you to like Visions and Voices Together, our Facebook page, so you'll get notified of our Thursday Facebook Live shows. I'm Charmaine Tanner, and I am passionate about helping you advocate for your child so your child is safe, happy, and learning every day next to his friends in the classroom. So thanks for being with us, and we shall see you next Thursday.
Thanks, Charmaine. Bye, Julie.
Bye, Paula. Thanks, Charmaine.
Bye-bye.